Good morning, everyone. Um, Before I get started, I want to mention one thing. Let me just get my good morning onto the chat. All right, done that. Okay, the main thing I want to mention before my panelists arrive is this book, The Schizophrenia Complex by Eve Maram. And this book is quite an incredible piece of work. It talks about Dr. Maram's son has schizophrenia, and what the schizophrenia complex talks about is what happens to those people who are around schizophrenia. It's about that experience, her experience in terms of her son's affliction and what that means to her. But she also has a very important perspective about the collective and about the craziness of our societies and so on. And so what I'd like to do while I'm waiting to begin on synchronicity here is I'd like to read to you just a passage of it, just one paragraph, to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. And let me just set up my screen a little bit clearer. Okay. All right. So I'm just reading one paragraph of the schizophrenia complex, and I'm going to focus on two paragraphs that relate to the collective, and then we'll move on. So I'm on pages 72 and 73, the one full paragraph on page 72, and the paragraph that begins on page 72 and ends on 73 of this book. It stands to reason that given the collective climate of extreme polarization in the world today, schools of thought in the diverse field of psychology are divided in their theoretical and treatment approaches to schizophrenia, in some ways mirroring the long-standing differences between medical psychiatry, ego psychology, and philosophical freelancers such as Lang and Perry. One unfortunate ramification of these differences is that resources for those suffering from schizophrenia and their families and communities are inconsistent, if not absent. The dearth of resources and lack of responsiveness to this problem might also be more than a bureaucratic failure. It might represent a collective schizophrenia complex at the institutional level, showing up as social policy that is stingy and ill-conceived. The disavowal of responsibility can be construed as an indirect, perhaps even unconscious, expression of rejection and avoidance. Beneath the failure to provide accessible, effective resources for those dealing with schizophrenia may lie an archetypal bedrock of fear of the other, the not me, expressed through a lack of support and viable options provided collectively. Better understanding and a more effective management and response. One moment. Right. All right, let me see where one moment, I seem to be having a small allergic reaction to something here in the house. I apologize for that. I'm going to mute from Sorry about that. I think I better back this up. So I'm beginning again on page 72. Beneath the failure to provide accessible, effective resources for those dealing with schizophrenia may lie an archetypal bedrock of fear of the other. The not me expressed through a lack of support and viable options provided collectively. Better understanding of and more effective management in response to this essentially archetypal illness requires a spirit of curiosity and inclusion. At the very least, on a conscious level, this problem suggests the need for clinicians to have an open dialogue, to discuss and question our beliefs about schizophrenia and advocate for resources. Doing so might also represent the depotentiation of a collective schizophrenia complex through conscious action. Okay, so this is Dr. Maram's call to action, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And in terms of, she offers a fairy tale here that sort of describes our plight in our collective vis-a-vis our former president. And so I thought I would read that to you and give you a sense of it. And I'm still reading from the Schizophrenia Complex, and it's by Eve Maram. It's published by Chiron, but it's chironpublications.com, but it's also available on Amazon. So I urge you to get a copy. And since Jordan has just arrived, I'll save this for a moment until we can reorganize here. Hi, Jordan. We are online, and I'm beginning with a reference to this book, The Schizophrenia Complex by Eve Maram, which I received from Chiron this week. And it's a very powerful book, both from a personal point of view and perspective, and from a societal point of view. So I have invited Dr. Maram to speak to us in a Wisdom Path colloquium on January the 21st at, it'll be 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time, and 8 p.m. European time. And so that will give us the broadest possible coverage of it. And I want to invite her for 2 sessions. One session, she will be talking about her personal experience at the individual level with the schizophrenia of her son. So the schizophrenia complex does not relate to someone who is schizophrenic themselves, but rather to the people who are in their orbit.
That's important.
Yeah. And so the schizophrenia complex arises in that. But what she has also done is pointed out the collective issues that arise around certain collective issues around our current affairs, let's say. And and I had just gotten up to the point where I was going to read sort of the seminal fairy tale that she gives us in one of the latter chapters, chapter 9 of her book. and it is the fairy tale of three billy goats gruff. Do you know this fairy tale?
I do, but I don't remember it off the top of my head.
Right. Well, we very definitely need to be aware of it now, because it definitely applies to our current situation in many different ways. But let me, I'll just read the fairy tale, and I think you'll get it. And this is a quote of the fairy tale as told by Linda Watts in the Encyclopedia of American Folklore. So here's the fairy tale. Three Billy Goats Gruff is a Norwegian fairy tale. It has an eat me when I'm fatter plot. The heroes of the tale are three male goats who need to outsmart a ravenous troll in order to cross the bridge to their feeding ground. The classic Norwegian fairy tale introduces three male goats, a small one, a medium-sized one, and a big one. They are sometimes identified as a youngster, a father, and a grandfather, but more often described as brothers. In the story, there is almost no grass left for them to eat where they live, so they must cross a river to get to a meadow or hillside on the other side of a stream to eat and fatten themselves up. To do so, however, they must first cross a bridge under which lives a fearsome and hideous troll who is so territorial that he eats anyone who tries to cross the bridge. The smallest billy goat, billy goat is the first to cross and is stopped abruptly by the troll, who threatens to gobble him up. However, the little goat convinces the troll to wait for his big brother to come across, because he is larger and would make for a more gratifying feast. The greedy troll agrees and lets the smallest goat cross. The medium-sized goat passes next. He is more cautious than his brother, but is also stopped by the troll and given the same threat. The second billy goat is allowed to cross as well after he tells the troll to wait for the biggest billy goat, because he is the largest of the three and will make the best meal. The third billy goat gets on the bridge and is also stopped by the hungry troll, who threatens to devour him as well. However, the third billy goat is big enough to challenge the troll and knocks him off the bridge with his horns. The troll falls into the stream and is carried away by the current. From then on, the bridge is safe, and all three goats are able to go to the rich fields around the summer farm in the hills, and they all live happily ever after. Does that bring it to mind anyone we know?
Yep. Knock on the bridge and head him downstream.
Yeah, in all sorts of ways. And so
well, and also just
currently,
politically, the whole younger, smaller fry politicians, and then the ones after, and then Liz Cheney comes up, and boom.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and we'll have to see how that works out. But we first, if we apply the troll to our former president, and we basically see what happened in 2016, where he basically ate all the small fry that were in the Republican group, and then the mama goat comes along in the form of Hillary Clinton, and she gets beaten back, but she doesn't get eaten, and so that allows for the mature billy goat, namely Joe Biden, to beat Trump without really running a campaign. I mean, he was really denying that he was campaigning against Trump in 2020 until, boy, the last minute. He finally said, okay, I'll do it. And the issue is that metaphorically, he was psychologically mature enough to knock off the president, and he did it without much effort. And why? Because, well, all those years in the Senate, whatever it was, 40 or 50 years in the Senate. Yeah, it was almost 50, I think. For at least 45 years in the Senate made him so mature that, he knew that what he could do, and had the maturity to just knock him off. And then this last midterm, again, the troll is scapegoating a lot of other people, but he's not strong enough, because the Republican Party is gaining back enough maturity to knock him off the bridge.
Well, and he has the strategy, tact, and wisdom, so that when someone like T comes at him in crazy making ways, he just listens in a way until a point when he leans in and says, "Are you okay?" It's like, he doesn't nip on the poison, and I think that brings that strategy, tact, and wisdom ends up bringing forward, what's the word? Bring forward a non-schizophrenic. It's very, like you said, mature way of engaging. Yeah. And I think that's important, because a lot of people were used to all of the fast, false sense of urgency, stare in the black mirror of their phone, or I want it now, or, oh, that's a hassle, I don't want to have to work for it. And right. The thing about instant gratification is that quick fixes always have shallow roots. Yeah. And the only time you can get a quick fix is if the fruit is already ripe on the tree and you can pick it. But there's a whole lot that came before that time. So I think that's an important piece with the three goats, as to he has horns, he has tools, and he has a size that has come over time.
Yeah. Well, and it took that, in this case, it took Joe Biden to knock him off. And what we see now very clearly is that the troll is now in the river and losing power, and he's struggling, but he ultimately will drown. And that relates to finally the country regaining its ego about being a United States of America, not a one-sided state of America. And so the country regains its ego in the form of the justice system getting its footing back, and saying, "No, you can't do that. I'm sorry." Yeah. There's 330 million of us, and the majority of us do not agree to that under any circumstances. And the process will make a whole new generation mature on all sides. And so anyway, I enjoyed reading that fairy tale this morning, and I wanted to read it to you today. But anyway, I highly recommend this book, The Schizophrenia Complex by Yves Maram. And if you get it, please look at page 72, the last two paragraphs on page 72 going on over to page 73. We will be having a Wisdom Pass session with Dr. Maram on the 21st of January at 2 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time, and 8 p.m. European Time. So please mark your calendars and plan to be with us then. Okay. So we are up to, in Synchronicity, we're up to paragraph 902.
Yep.
One moment, please.
Okay.
Sorry, I hope I saved you from that particular sneeze.
Yeah.
I'm due for my allergy injection on Tuesday, so at this point in the month, my immunity to dust,
Yep,
sort of falls off the road. So
I had to get
so what I want to do is I want to I think that paragraph 904 is very meaningful. What I'd like to do is I'll just quickly read through paragraphs 902 and 903, and then we can see if there's any comment there, and then you can read 904, okay, which is a page long, but it has a lot of meat in it. And I will, when you're doing that, I'll put it up on the screen so everyone can see. So paragraph 902, I'm reading from Synchronicity and Acausal Connecting Principle by C.G. Jung. It's found in volume 8 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, and in the freestanding book, Synchronicity and Acausal Connecting Principle, which also uses the same paragraph numbering system. Paragraph 902. So the essential thing that remains over from our astrological statistics is the fact that the first batch of 180 marriage horoscopes shows a distinct maximum of 18 for
Moon conjunct Sun.
Okay, Moon conjunct Sun. And the second batch of 220, a maximum of 24 of Moon conjunct Sun, Moon conjunct Moon. These two aspects have long been mentioned in the old literature as marriage characteristics, and they therefore represent the oldest tradition. The third batch of 83 yields a maximum of 8 for Moon conjunct Ascending. Is that what that is?
Yeah, Moon conjunct Ascendant.
Okay, Ascendant. These maxima, as we have said, have probabilities of about 1 to 1,000, 1 to 10,000, and 1 to 50, respectively. I should like to illustrate what has happened here by means of an example. You take 3 matchboxes, you put 1,000 black ants in the first, 10,000 in the second, and 50 in the third, together with 1 white ant in each. Shut the boxes and bore a hole in each of them, small enough to allow only 1 ant to crawl through at a time. The first ant to come out of each of the 3 boxes is always the white one. The chances of this actually happening are extremely improbable. Even in the first 2 cases, the probability works out at 1 to 1,000 times 10,000, which means that such a coincidence is to be expected only in 1 case out of 10 million. It is improbable that it would ever happen to anyone's experience. Yet in my statistical investigation, it happened that precisely the three conjunctions stressed by astrological tradition came together in the most improbable way. Okay, comments on that?
The one comment I have is there's another part to that study in the matchboxes and the ants, and that is the white one will emerge first, or whichever one is the, if you all red ants and one black ant, all black ants and one red ant, the one that's the anomaly will always emerge first, except if you shake that box up, they will all then turn on that one ant and kill it. So there's the community piece of that, and the collective piece of that, where if you stir the pot, shake it up, then that's when the problems start. So when it's all calm and peaceful and basically everyone's at the mall with Santa Claus, and then it's fine. But then when you shake that up, it becomes very not fine very quickly. And you're still on mute. You're still on mute. Yep.
Okay, I got that. I was trying to pull these pages up here because I have. All right, so last week we got into the weeds of all these numbers, and so we're beyond that. And what I want to do is I want to share. We have read through 902 and 903, and I'll share the PDF that I have here that I scanned so others can see it.
My other comment would be when he says, yet in my statistical investigation, it happened that precisely the three conjunctions stressed by astrological tradition came together in the most improbable way. And what happens then, there's the persona magnetism. The sun and the moon are the most evident. So when you get that honeymoon period, and then you get all the other actors that occur later, and you get the whole person. Yeah. So the sun and the moon are the quickest inroad to get to know the general lay of the land of a personality. But then to get past the general and actually have some substance with those general pieces, you need to see the other aspects, the other planets, the other asteroids, if you use asteroids, and the relationships of those in the chart. So right. I think that his improbable piece is people tend to come together often mostly by sun and moon because that's what you see.
Yeah. Well, and also this ignores kind of he's here, he's a poor statistician in general. And so he's ignoring the elephant in the room, which is the instinct of the ants, which, it's obviously instinct that drives the white ant out first.
Right. An instinct that doesn't do anything with the red ants when they're not shaken up.
Right.
It's
more and so that sort of skews probability analysis. But anyway, I mean, he's made his point. So we're going to go on, and I'm going to share my scan of this next paragraph because you might find it interesting.
Also, I'd say, just in addition to basically layer in the shaking up the box aspect of the astrology, when people meet in storms, crises, and they really see true colors come out, often people connect then because the box is shaken up and they see really what people do when the hits the fan kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And how they respond to conflict, as it were.
Right. And we're sort of seeing this happen in our current affairs, where our box has been shaken up by our former president, and it's going to take a while for that to settle out. I mean, now this morning on one of the news shows I saw, I think it's Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, who was sounding like the totally responsible and thoughtful Republican candidate. He's going to probably run for president, I guess. And it's all well and good for him to have hope that he might be elected president. However, the fact is that even if he does, in fact, knock off the troll, he's still in a box where the ants are all shaken up, and there's no chance that he will come out of the general election in 2024 as our president. No chance whatsoever.
Well, and I think there's also that quality of the wisdom piece that comes from the experience of crises, drama, etc., where when the box is shaken up, when basically it's all crazy making, which of the ones in the box are able to self-regulate and be the eye of the storm?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, all right. So moving on, I'll share this screen again. And you're going to be reading from the bottom of 476.
To paragraph 904.
Yep.
For the sake of accuracy, however, it should be pointed out that it is not the same white ant that is the first to appear each time. That is to say, although there is always a lunar conjunction and always a classical one of decisive significance, they are nevertheless different conjunctions because each time the moon is associated with a different partner. These are, of course, the three main components of the horoscope, namely the ascendant or rising degree of the zodiacal sign, which characterizes the moment, the moon, which characterizes the day, and the sun, which characterizes the month of birth. Hence, if we consider only the first two batches, we must assume 2 white ants for each box. This correction raises the probability of the coinciding lunar conjunctions to 1 to 2.5 million. If we take the third batch as well, the coincidence of the 3 classical moon aspects has a probability of 1 to 62,500,000. The first proportion is significant even when taken by itself, for it shows that the coincidence is a very improbable one. But the coincidence with the third lunar conjunction is so remarkable that it looks like a deliberate arrangement in favor of astrology. If, therefore, the result of our experiment should be found to have a significant, in essence, more than merely chance probability, the case for astrology would be proved in the most satisfactory way. If, on the contrary, the figures actually fall within the limits of chance expectation, they do not support the astrological claim. They merely imitate accidentally the ideal answer to astrological expectation. It is nothing but a chance result from the statistical point of view, yet it is meaningful on account of the fact that it looks as if it validated this expectation. It is just what I call a synchronistic phenomenon. The statistically significant statement only concerns regularly occurring events, and if considered as axiomatic, it simply abolishes all exceptions to the rule. It produces a merely average picture of natural events, but not a true picture of the world as it is. Yet the exceptions, and my results are exceptions, and most improbable ones at that, are just as important as the rules. Statistics would not even make sense without exceptions. There is no rule that is true under all circumstances, for this is the real and not a statistical world. Because the statistical method shows only the average aspects, it creates an artificial and predominantly conceptual picture of reality. That is why we need a complementary principle for a complete description and explanation of nature. Oh, you're muted.
We need more than one rule. And so the point is that, yes, you can get this result. I mean, I can get certain results if I hold all other variables constant. I can get pretty much any result I want most of the time. And this is what happens with science often. The scientists get to decide what's on the table, what's going to affect their experiment, and they don't consider the variables. And I ran into this with my MBA, which was 15 courses in statistics by different names, is the way I refer to it, because it was the Chicago school, not the Harvard School of Study, founded by Milton Friedman. And, the problem with that method is it generates psychotics. It generates a psychosis in how we deal with corporations. So when I was coming up in the world, when I was going to law school and going to the Marines and so on, in those days in a corporation, there were three groups. There were the shareholders, the management, and the employees, and all three had to be maximized for. There had to be a balance. But what the statistical method did was it made everything dependent on the bottom line, and which meant that managers got to control the world, and shareholders and employees were just cogs in the wheel that they would slough off. And you see that in spades in Donald Trump's behavior, where he just doesn't hesitate to blow somebody away, regardless of what contribution they may have made. And so even, finally, he's got this former accountant who, is finally blowing the whistle on him after 40 years, because, everybody has their limit of how much of that kind of behavior they can take. And he took it for a long time, but in the end, it's going to crush our former president, whether or not he ever goes to jail. I doubt that he'll ever go to jail, because he'll have various get out of jail free cards that will let him escape. But he's going to be, within a year, he's going to be the butt of all jokes, is what I guess.
Yeah, and what I'm wondering too is with the whole tax records thing, that there's, for example, the IRS will work with you, and don't worry if you make a mistake, they'll let you know. I mean, they have their transcripts. Well, there comes a time though when they're going to let you know time's up, and I kind of wonder if that time has come and the accountant's like, I'm diving overboard, this, because I'm not going to be here. Well, he's been working that in the background, maybe, I don't know. Yeah. But there comes a point where it's not workable. It's to come to Jesus time, I mean, and
the point is, if he doesn't pay his lawyers, eventually you run out of lawyers that'll work for you for free just for the prestige.
Right. Well, we saw that this last year, where people, he couldn't get anyone of experience, and then the people who were less experienced wouldn't go because they saw the people of experience saying no. So even if they didn't know why, they weren't going to hop in.
Right. And then what he's left with is TV lawyers. And guys who are smart enough to say, well, you give me $3 million up front and I'll start. And then he ignores his advice.
Yeah.
So, he's still trying to angle for being president because he thinks that he can take over the government, and to hell with democracy, and the American people have a different idea. So anyway,
and I think his mode is only, it's not to do something of substance. It's to do whatever he wants and then appeal. So it's a stalling tactic,
right?
Rather than, basically, my dog ate my homework. I have a new dog. It ate my homework. I have another new dog. It ate my homework. It's always a stalling and excuse instead of a responsible standing up.
Right. Well, or it can be a responsible standing up. I mean, I used the same strategy in law when I was being sued for foreclosure on my home starting in 2010. And, I appealed to the Court of Appeals of Maryland 5 times and to the U.S. Supreme Court once. And the courts just kept allowing my opponent to change the identity, literally change the identity of the plaintiff 4 times. But the point is, the court was never going to let me have my house for free, right? But they couldn't get me out because I was right. Legally I was right, but the court had to deny all the way along until finally, I had moved out of the home, and at that point I just sort of lost interest in the case. But I treated it as a job, a job, in the sense that it was the way that I kept a roof over my wife's and my head for 9 years. And but in the end, you can't fight City Hall. And so the courts just were completely permissive to the plaintiffs. And they just wouldn't pay attention to the fact that there was fraud left, right, and center there. They just couldn't do that. So anyway, I understand how he goes about it and why he's going about it, but ultimately he's going to run out of steam. And the question will be, what's his best way out at that point? My best way out was to settle it, and just turn over the keys finally. But I fought pretty hard for 9 years with filing over 4,000 pages of documents before I ran out of steam. So I've been there. I know what he's doing, and I know why he's doing it, but he's started so many of these that he's going to have the death of 1,000 cuts, basically. And I don't mean a physical death. I mean,
and that's the death of 1,000 slices, or death of 1,000 cuts. It's
right.
Little by little, the baseline is deflated unnoticeably each day, and then till the point when you don't know why you can't move, and then you realize, because every single day for the last 1,000 days, I've been cut, so to speak, metaphorically. And the thing is, I think the thing that's different between your case and his is that, you had something of substance originally, a home.
Yep.
And he's basically just saying, I'm going to go out, and break the speed limit and then appeal. Well, he's because he's doing just whatever he wants without any rules, so to speak, it's almost inherently always going to break the law more than it's not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was always true that I hadn't paid my mortgage, which was the genesis of the foreclosure lawsuit. But the reason I didn't pay it, and the reason that 10 million other homeowners didn't pay it, is that the investment banks had, crushed the economy, and so we had lost our savings and our livelihood. All 10 million of us. If you don't have a job, you're all mortgages are contingent upon you having enough money to pay. And, I was at a pretty high level. So my mortgages were actually $7,200 a month, believe it or not. That's what the payment was. And I kept paying that for long after my livelihood was crushed by the investment banks. But, the people that support our ex-president can't think about that. They don't know. They don't understand that the people that they're supporting are the very people that crushed the economy. The Rust Belt is the Rust Belt because of the GOP, and which allowed it to go to hell without providing any options. So now they're starting to see that they have to bring manufacturing back in order to keep a balance. But the Democrats have got that number also. So anyway, moving on. 905, if we now consider the results of Rhine's experiments, and particularly the fact that they depend in large measure on the subject of active interest, we can regard what happened in our case as a synchronistic phenomenon. The statistical material shows that a practicality as well as theoretically improbable chance combination occurred, which coincides in the most remarkable way with the traditional astrological expectations. And the author points to there's a footnote.
The Rorschach test.
Yeah, to those who accept the possibilities of ESP get results above expectations, whereas those who reject it get negative results. And that's definitely true. I'm going to just move this on to the next page.
And the thing about that too, acceptance of the expectation versus rejecting the expectation, that's you leave the door open, you walk through. You leave the door closed, nothing in, nothing out. So
right. And that's what astrology does, basically. And so such a coincidence should occur at all is so improbable and so incredible that nobody could have dared to predict anything like it. It really does look as if the statistical material had been manipulated and arranged so as to give the appearance of a positive result. The necessary emotional and archetypal conditions for a synchronistic phenomenon were already given, since it is obvious that both my coworker and myself had a lively interest in the outcome of the experiment, and apart from that, the question of synchronicity had been engaging my attention for many years. What seems in fact to have happened, and seems often to have happened, bearing in mind the long astrological tradition, is that we got a result which has presumably turned up many times before in history. Had the astrologers, with but few exceptions, concerned themselves more with statistics and questioned the justice of their interpretations in a scientific spirit, they would have discovered long ago that their statements rested on a precarious foundation. But I imagine that in their case, too, as with me, a secret mutual connivance existed between the material and the psychic state of the astrologer. This correspondence is simply there, like any other agreeable or annoying accident, and it seems doubtful to me whether it can be proved scientifically to be anything more than that. One may be fooled by coincidence, but one has to have a very thick skin not to be impressed by the fact that out of 50 possibilities, 3 times precisely, those turned up as maxima, which are regarded by tradition as typical. Okay, so, the point is, and it's easiest to describe in terms of the Chinese zodiac, the 12 ways of being in the world. over thousands of years, literally, the Chinese would say, well, it's a dog year, and this child was born in a dog year, and these are the characteristics of a dog year, so this must be the characteristics of this child. And so they they would say that over and over again to one another for thousands of years, and it turns out ultimately that it becomes true. It actually becomes true in the psyche of our species. And so it's not only it's not only the Chinese that it's true for, it's true for all of us, because by a collective spirit, they made it true. Okay.
Well, and I think that's what's important in astrology, Saturn and Uranus, Saturn being structure and the status quo, accepted structure and status quo.
Right.
Uranus being the growth principle, which is always going to happen regardless. But what happens with, for example, the Chinese zodiac that way, a dog year. If you hear something enough times, you can't, water conforms to its cup. There's only so long you can swim in sewage before you will have it inside, so to speak, or actually. And so it brings up the even that footnote as the result becomes blurred with larger figures. So what happens is it's important to be mindful of which direction the collective is going, but to discern, shall you do that as well? And because what happens is there's some things that are so accepted, and honestly, other than breath and heartbeats, those are about the only two that are, standard. And if they're not, then you're not being influenced anymore. But being influenced by something that's so prevalent, it's difficult to see the forest for the trees,
Right.
And so.
Well, and there's an interesting comment here from Patrick Hollywood, who, good morning, Patrick. It's nice to see you this morning. And that I'm sorry, that's an in-joke because I know Patrick.
Yes.
Anyway, so the fact that Elon Musk allowed Trump back onto Twitter, Elon Musk thinks that that's going to now save Twitter. But the problem is that Elon Musk is an autistic person, and autistic people get very focused on one idea, and sometimes they can be terribly successful, as he has been with SpaceX, for example. But I think that's mostly success because he's not calling the shots day by day. It's a lot of a collective of a lot of other people that want to make things happen. Whether Tesla is going to still be a big thing if he moves its manufacturing to Texas is an entirely different question. But with respect to Twitter, we already see what his bad ideas that are not reflective of all the people that operate on Twitter can do to a large organization if he doesn't consider all the facts and just considers this freedom of speech thing, which I do agree with him that freedom of speech is important, and so we need to let it reign as much as possible. But freedom of speech doesn't mean that you can say any goddamn thing you want to. And
well, and I think too with the freedom of speech,
I just let me finish my sentence. And so the point is, there are consequences. There are consequences to having unrivaled freedom of speech, And if you force it, if you force it when the consequences start to emerge, it's a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. Go ahead.
I was going to say, just right along those lines, that, for example, I mean, I don't look at things so much positively or negatively. I look at them actionably. What's the workability? Because pros and cons fool you. You can look at the cons all your life and you still haven't done anything about it. I mean, you just know why you aren't doing it. But if you look at the pros, then they can deceive you, as well as sometimes they'll inform your acceptable risk.
Right.
But from a workable perspective, if I said, well, everyone's good at something, so I guess that guy's just good at being a dick. You know, I mean, so, you know, it's like, you know,
well, the point is a collective of this. My mother tells me, if you say that again, I'm going to wash your mouth out with soap. And the next time I say it, she actually does. Then, oh, by the way, I'm going to stop saying that. Okay. I did stop saying that. And so, you know, just because you think it doesn't mean you can speak it. And you have to learn, you have to learn boundaries. And in a collective operation like Twitter has to learn boundaries that are implicit in the collective. And so just because Elon Musk believes in absolute freedom of speech doesn't mean he's going to escape consequences. And obviously he has experienced consequences in spades in the form of losing a lot of major advertising support for Twitter. Whether it will come back, it probably will, but he is going to have to rein in his own proclivity to have absolute freedom of speech, because if he allows people to, shout fire in a crowded theater and that sort of thing, he's going to experience the consequences of it.
And I think what's interesting is I read an article recently about how there has often been a culture in the companies of managing him from the top down.
I'm sure.
And what's interesting about that to me is it reminds me of in college, this one guy in his presentation just started saying, "God damn it," all the time. And the professor said, "Well, let's find out what the real hook is." And like behind the scenes. And so the professor walks in, he goes, "Son, contrary to popular belief, God's last name is not damn it." And and it took the fire right out of the hook. And he never said it again, because what happened is that was funny, but it was funny in a way he didn't expect. And now when he said it, he couldn't not think about that joke. And what happened is it took the fire right out of the alleged, sensational piece of it. And I think that's again about how to get to substance.
Right. And so Justin says, I just wrote an article on the freedom of speech. The main examples of censorship in the Western Hemisphere are less about law than about popular opinion, or rather fear of the public opinion. Well, yeah, absolutely. Because, there can be a reason that you would say various expletives. Okay. There can be a reason. You've got to get somebody to move because and they won't move because a boulder is going to fall on their head. And so you use expletives to get their attention, maybe, even though that's not how you would behave in polite society. So it's very hard for society to make a decision about what can and cannot be said and put it down in a law, because there are always exceptions. And Jung talks about this in volume 18 of the collected works. I'll see if I can find it here. quickly.
Well, and that reminds me too, my dad said you can use almost any expletive you want in a poem except the F word. It's the hardest to actually use in a way that's actually gonna be anything applicable. Because you have to, a charge has to be built to use it properly. And that's that whole boulder example, to try to immediately get someone's attention, regardless of what the situation is.
Right. And so, there have to be, rules to a certain degree. And yet, there are always exceptions. So, and I always love to bring this one out when somebody brings up Jordan Peterson and his 12 rules of life. Goodness gracious. Okay, so this is Jung's Rules of Life, and this is found in volume 18 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, paragraphs 1428 to 1430. So I'll read it. In reply, and it was because a magazine called World Watch that was published in Zurich, it's actually Weltwoche, had asked Jung and several other people to comment on the subject of the rules of life, and this is what Jung replied. In reply to your kind inquiry about rules of life, I would like to remark that I've had so much to do with people that I have always endeavored to live by no rules as far as possible. Non-observance of rules requires, of course, far less effort, but usually one makes a rule in order to repress the tendency in oneself to follow it. In psychology, above all, rules are valid only when they can be reversed. Also, they are not without their dangers, since they consist of words, and our civilization is largely founded on a superstitious belief in words. One of the supreme religious assumptions is actually the word. Words can take the place of men and things. This has its advantage, but it is also a menace. One can then spare oneself the trouble of thinking for oneself or making any effort to one's own advantage or disadvantage and that of one's fellows. I have, for instance, a tendency to make a principle of doing what I want to do or should do as soon as possible. This can be very unwise and very even stupid. The same applies to practically all adages and rules of life. Take, for example, the saying, quid id est prudenter agas et respes finem, which translates to, whatever it be, act prudently and consider the end. But in this way, however praiseworthy in principle is, you can let a vitally important decision of the moment slip through your fingers. No rules can cope with the paradoxes of life. Moral law, like natural law, represents only one aspect of reality. It does not prevent one from following certain regular habits unconsciously. Habits which one does not notice oneself, but can only discover by making careful inquiries among one's fellows. But people seldom enjoy having what they don't know about themselves pointed out to them by others. And so they prefer to lay down rules, which are the exact opposite of what they are doing in reality.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. And so, I would say to Mr. Musk that you should consider what you yourself are doing in reality. And because I'm sure that people are censured within Musk organizations for perfectly reasonable positions, for example, that you know, he may not believe, but are nonetheless true and have an impact on his profitability. But that's just me. Anyway, okay.
Well, the thing about Twitter too is, I mean, it's Personaville. I mean, there's substance there, but it's all,
Well, I think I think in total, it's the collective unconscious. It represents the collective unconscious. And unfortunately, it doesn't do that freely anymore. Okay. When it started, it allowed me, and I used it this way in early days, it allowed me to meet a lot of people randomly that I would never meet in the world. Right. Okay. But today, what they do is they try to tailor what you see to what you agree with. Okay. And so therefore they've completely changed the randomness of the platform. And I still do use it because I use it as a mode of bringing attention to myself for advertising purposes, basically. But it has really lost its luster by being so targeted for advertisers, and its value is largely lost because of that.
I think it goes. I agree. There was substance in the beginning that I think did note the collective unconscious, but now it notes the collective retail environment. Trying to get who's the loudest, who's squawking, who's calm. How does someone get your attention? And the second piece, I think that's more important, is it really expresses the dark side of empathy. Because what happens is, it's like in the early 70s with the empathy experiment, I think 73 it started, is that people would empathize, which meant dignity and difference. I'm not going to judge you. I'm going to listen. We're going to learn from one another or not, but we're not going to beat each other over the head, so to speak. Well, that's fine. And that goes along, and you meet people that you wouldn't normally meet. They're outside your circle. It's not a comfort zone. It's a world.
Yeah.
But the problem is, over time, the aggregate composite of your group is more and more like how you empathize. So instead of the ideas, it's the methodology of how do I, Jordan, empathize? How does Skip empathize? And then over decades, what happens is then you get tribalism, and you get these insulated groups, which are actually completely contrary to the notion of empathy in the first place.
Right.
And so what's interesting is the dark side of empathy is that when not kept fresh, you don't meet the whole world. You just meet all the same people around the world.
Right. So for example, yes. So for example, if I say something on Twitter today, there's almost no chance that a GOP Trumpist would even see my tweet. There's almost no chance of that, because my tweet would go out to people who think like me, and vice versa. And so my serendipity way of attracting people to myself was seriously cut off by this focus on advertising and so on. And so, I still think it's a valid tool, and if I pay attention to maybe trends and something like that, it might have some value. But in terms of laying something fresh out there that people can think about and be attracted to you because, oh, by the way, you might have some good ideas, that serendipity is largely lost in today's Twitter.
Yeah, and I think it goes, if I look at tarot decks and how the Kickstarter campaigns, hey, I'm on card 35, follow me along in the process. They build a following because people are included in at least watching the process, whereas a deck just gets released and people are kind of, well, what's that? they just kind of move along. And so there is that, the communal effect. And, if you don't build that catchment area, as it were,
Right.
then good luck, because it's, you're going to sit back on, oh, well, there's substance that people don't want. No, you don't have no idea what they want and don't want,
Right.
because you actually didn't build the environment to hear the commentary along the way. So it is, I mean, I may be okay at marketing, but I'm horrible at advertising. And marketing is just remember me. Well, the thing is, if you have something that people don't want to remember, your marketing doesn't matter, because you don't want to remember you.
Right.
And so, so that's tricky. I mean, that's tricky.
So Justin has a couple of interesting observations here. In Denmark, it is illegal to flag with other national flags. I presume that he means by this showing a flag. A guy was just sentenced for flagging with the Stars and Stripes and had the flag confiscated by the police. But simultaneously, everyone here flags with the Ukrainian national flag without consequences.
There you go.
Yeah. Boy, that says it all, doesn't it? And who was the guy that?
Well, so yes, what's the exception?
Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde at one point said, we will ultimately lose democracy because fascism will come wearing a flag and carrying a Bible. And boy, have we ever seen that.
Well, and the thing with Oscar Wilde too, I love that quote, because he also said, it's important to tell the truth, but if you're going to tell the truth, make people laugh. Otherwise, they will kill you.
Yeah, that's right. And boy, he really nailed those. And so,
well, I think
in fairness, I do have to mention that Oscar Wilde wrote a play called "You Can't Take It With You," and Joseph Campbell Joseph Campbell got up and walked out of the premiere of "You Can't Take It With You" because he grumbled that it was a knockoff from Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, and so he accused Oscar Wilde of plagiarism. Obviously, it wasn't pure plagiarism, but it was. He probably did follow an archetypal pattern that was followed in Finnegan's Wake ultimately.
Well, and I think that's important too, because that rather than plagiarism, he had the same conceptual idea. And what's interesting is it's the importance of who had the $1 million idea. Well, it's the person who launched it first, because there's oftentimes you have things that come across your plate that you concoct all on your own, and then you turn around and even Google it, and you're like, oh my God, there's like 52 books on this.
That's right. Well, because it's in the collective unconscious, and we now know that it's in the collective unconscious, and you're just catching it out of the collective before somebody else does, or then you find out you're not even first.
well, it's like, if I look at all this, thoughts become things, and the manifestation movements and such, and well, all I have to do is look to Epictetus or Cicero or Plato, and all of them, the water conforms to its cup, the thing becomes its environment. So, and some of them even said, the thought that is thought becomes the thing that is present. I mean, so there's all these paraphrases now that are, again, sound bites of Greek philosophers, Egyptian philosophers, further back. And so it's like, what is it? T.S. Eliot, there is nothing new in this world, but everything must be original. So it's, it's own it and put your spin on it, and don't worry about
it. I was seeing a documentary yesterday about the 15 facts about the pyramids of Giza, which scare the hell out of scientists. And there's such things as they cannot figure out how the ancients got the math right. And we're pikers, actually, because if our scientists can't answer those 15 questions, then we're very far from being the wonderkin that we think we are.
Well, and I have to say, in regards to the math too, the most accurate way to do mathematics is geometry, because you're looking at intersections, which inherently, infinitesimally nail the mark. So, I mean, they're playing with, Orion's belt in the sky, and they're dropping back by, where does the sun land day to day to day on each horizon? And literally, those are points you can plot that then make intersections. And frankly, rather than doing the math, it's doing the geometry. So the math is only present for the scale you want that geometry to work at. And I find that the shapes and just the symbolic piece without numbers, I mean, that's, to me, the geometry is interesting, because especially with the pyramids, because the Great Pyramid, Khufu, the biggest one, it has no inscriptions. It has no hieroglyphs, which says, oh, is that utilitarian? Is that a tool? And why is there this hydroxide residue in the base, where it's like, there's a whole thing about the book called The Giza Power Plant. And whether it's true or not, it could have been a power generating device.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting points they made was that it's probably true that the pyramids were not built by slaves, as is commonly thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's commonly thought that the pyramids were built by slaves, and they were built over a very long period of time. So a lot of things could happen in the collective if it was slavery. I mean, you could imagine, warriors coming from other places and saying, well, the heck with this, and we're not giving our people up for this, and so they point out that there was actually a economy and a society built around the building of the pyramids, and and
well-fed workers that, I mean,
right,
actually
well-fed, well-organized workers, and all you have to do is look at the cathedrals of Europe to know that that's true, because
and also
those the workers on the cathedrals were not doing it because of the pay, the physical pay. They were doing it because of a spiritual aspect that was not, you couldn't touch. Right. And many of them worked for generations. They finished a cathedral that their grandfathers started.
Right. And I think two things there. One, I mean, that they were well fed, I think, and I think well beered, because the Egyptian beer, I think alcohol content was 2.5 to 3.5. It wasn't that high. What it was, they often had it for breakfast. It was a huge source of B vitamins. So, their beer didn't start out as an alcoholic, thing. It's actually a vitamin supplement that those occurred. And what's interesting about then the cathedrals, there's often this infinity quality talked about in a nave, where they're like, well, it looks like it kind of tries to go around a corner. And the thing is, yes, that's true. But if you look at it, and here comes the math and not the geometry, if you look at when the first master builder died, surveying and what is true north has always been the biggest argument. No, my direction is better than your direction. You will find in the nave, the axis going all the way down until the first master builder dies. What is the first thing he does? What is the first thing that's done? He resurveys true north, And it always, oh no, true north is, and they will continue building it like 1.5 degrees different. So the axis actually does bend in most cathedrals, but if you look at where it bends versus the time of construction, it's usually right when the master builder died, because they recite true north because, oh, finally, I'm not second in command.
So you're talking about horizontally.
Horizontally. Yeah, as it goes down, they'll recite true north and it bends. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but 0.5 to 1.5 degrees. And the rest of it is built along that until, if another master, that one dies, then they recite it. And so it's a strange thing.
And the amazing thing that they were talking about yesterday was that the master builders in the pyramids kept making those changes for astronomical purposes,
right?
And made the necessary changes so that they kept straight lines, which allowed the pyramids to be built, because they took generations to build.
Well, yeah, and I laugh that my joke would be that at that point when the axis is changed, that's when the roofers will curse your name.
I'm sure, yeah. Okay, like, well, reading on here, let's read on. So paragraph 906. As though to make this startling result even more impressive, we found that use had been made of unconscious deception. On first working out the statistics, I was put off the trail by a number of errors, which I fortunately discovered in time. After overcoming this difficulty, I then forgot to mention in the Swiss edition of this book that the ant comparison, if applied to our experiment, only fits if respectively 2 or 3 white ants are assumed each time. This considerably reduces the improbability of our results. Then at the 11th hour, Professor Fiers, on checking his probability calculations yet again, found that he had been deceived by the factor of 5. The improbability of our results was again reduced, though without reaching a degree which one could have described as probable. The errors all tend to exaggerate the results in a way favorable to astrology, and add most suspiciously to the impression of an artificial or fraudulent arrangement of the facts, which was so mortifying to those concerned that they would probably have preferred to keep silent about it. Amen. This is just backing up what Jordan just said about true north here. So reading on, go ahead and at 907, Jordan.
I know, however, from long experience of these things, that spontaneous synchronistic phenomena draw the observer by hook or by crook into what is happening, and occasionally make them an accessory to the deed. That is the danger inherent in all parapsychological experiments. The dependence of ESP on an emotional factor in the experimenter and subject is a case in point. I therefore consider it a scientific duty to give as complete an account as possible of the result, and to show how not only the statistical material, but the psychic processes of the interested parties were affected by the synchronistic arrangement. Although warned by previous experience, I was cautious enough to submit my original count in the Swiss edition to 4 competent persons, among them 2 mathematicians. I allowed myself to be lulled into a sense of security too soon. Paragraph 908, the corrections made here do not in any way alter the fact that the maximal frequencies lie with the 3 classical lunar aspects.
Okay. 909. In order to assure myself of the chance nature of the result, I undertook one more statistical experiment. I broke up the original and fortuitous chronological order and the equally fortuitous division into 3 batches by mixing the first 150 marriages with the last 150, taking the latter in reverse order. That is to say, I put the first marriage on top of the last, and then the second on top of the last one but one, and so on. Then I divided the 300 marriages into 3 batches of 100. The result was as follows. Okay, so here he's giving his result. The result of the first batch is amusing insofar as only 15 of the 300 marriages have none of the 50 selected aspects in common. The second batch yields 2 maxima, of which the second again represents a classical conjunction. The third batch yields a maximum of moon conjunct ascending, which we already know as the third classical conjunction. The total result shows that another chance arrangement of the marriages can easily produce a result that deviates from the earlier total, but still does not quite prevent the classical conjunctions from turning up.
I think what's interesting about that is with that table, if I put the whole sum together, it's 11 plus 11 plus 11 plus 12 is 45%. The problem is no aspects in the first batch, 11%. That's discountable. But if I look at the second batch and the third batch, and I sum those, second batch plus third batch, it's 34%. So in a sense, 34% is not a negligible number. It's not under 5% from a statistics perspective. So what I see there then as a sum total whole, this moon and Mars ascendant and sun connection is their inhabitants of 34% of the results, which can become pretty important. And then if I look back down, 11, and 12%, each of those is equally interdependent on the others. So it's interesting because of the numbers that sun conjunct Mars, moon conjunct moon, and moon conjunct ascendant, each average mean have 11.3% or so. I mean, 11, 34%. So divide by 3 is pretty much 11 and change. So yeah. It's interesting, 11 and
well, and I think the sum total of this basically is that, yeah, we have some ideas about astrology and about statistics, but right. And about psychology, but we really need to combine them to come up with any serious conclusion. And what we come up with is that, we're our own minds are skewing the results.
I think that, and also nowhere is mentioned age, which would be probable advanced psychological development the older the couples are. So, I mean, there's a potential there for these to be totally different and later in life. So I'm curious. I mean, it makes me curious the age of the couples, because, that would change. I mean, the limerent, infatuative 17, 18-year-olds versus someone who may want that again at 70, or someone at 42 who, no, that's a bunch of hocus pocus. I mean, so, where they fall on the spectrum of what's romance versus, philia versus agape versus eros versus storge, all the different kinds of love, or all the different kinds of what brought the marriage together are missing, I think, from an age perspective, which would qualify, I think, so basically that's saying the astrology will change for you through life.
Right. So let us blast through to the end of this appendix. There's an appendix to chapter 2, but let's see if we can blast through the next 4 pages. Okay. So you go ahead and read 9/11. Yeah.
The result of our experiment tallies with our experience of mantic procedures. One has the impression that these methods and others like them create favorable conditions for the occurrence of meaningful coincidences. It is quite true that the verification of synchronistic phenomena is a difficult and sometimes impossible task. Rhine's achievement in demonstrating, with the help of unexceptionable material, the coincidence of a psychic state with a corresponding objective process must therefore be rated all the higher, despite the fact that the statistical method is in general highly unsuited to do justice to unusual events. Rhine's experiments have nevertheless withstood the ruinous influence of statistics. Their results must therefore be taken into account in any assessment of synchronistic phenomena.
Paragraph 912, in view of the leveling influence which the statistical method has on the quantitative determination of synchronicity, we must ask how it was that Rhine succeeded in obtaining positive results. I maintain that he would never have got the results he did if he had carried out his experiments with a single subject and only a few. He needed a constant renewal of interest and emotion with its characteristic abaissement mental, which tips the scales in favor of the unconscious. Only in this way can space and time be relativized to a certain extent, thereby reducing the chances of a causal process. What then happens is a kind of creation ex nihilo, an act of creation that is not causally explicable. The mantic procedures owe their effectiveness to this same connection with emotionality. By touching an unconscious aptitude, they stimulate interest, curiosity, expectation, hope, and fear, and consequently evoke a corresponding preponderance of the unconscious. The effective numinous agents in the unconscious are the archetypes. By far the greatest number of spontaneous synchronistic phenomena that I have had occasion to observe and analyze can easily be shown to have direct connection with an archetype. This in itself is an irrepresentable psychoid factor in the collective unconscious. The latter cannot be localized, since either it is complete in principle in every individual or is found to be the same everywhere. You could never say with certainty whether what appears to be going on in the collective unconscious of a single individual is not also happening in other individuals or organisms or things or situations. When, for instance, the vision arose in Swedenborg's mind of a fire in Stockholm, there was a real fire raging there at the same time, without there being any demonstrable or even thinkable connection between the two. I certainly would not like to undertake to prove the archetypal connection in this case. I would only point to the fact that in Swedenborg's biography, there are certain things which throw a remarkable light on his psychic state. We must assume that there was a lowering of the threshold of consciousness, which gave him access to absolute knowledge. The fire in Stockholm was, in a sense, burning in him too. For the unconscious psyche, space and time seem to be relative. That is to say, knowledge finds itself in a space-time continuum in which space is no longer space nor time. If, therefore, the unconscious should develop or maintain a potential in the direction of consciousness, it is then possible for parallel attempts or events to be perceived or known. Compared with Rhine's work, the great disadvantage of my astrological statistics lies in the fact that the entire experiment was carried out on only one subject, myself. I did not experiment with a variety of subjects. Rather, it was the varied material that challenged my interest. I was thus in the position of a subject who is at first enthusiastic, but afterwards cools off on becoming habituated to this ESP experiments. The result, therefore, deteriorated with the growing number of experiments, which in this case corresponded to the exposition of the material in batches, so that the accumulation of larger numbers only blurred the favorable initial result. Equally, my final experiment showed that the discarding of the original order and the division of the horoscopes into arbitrary batches produce, as might be expected, a different picture, though its significance is not altogether clear. Rhine's rules are to be recommended wherever, as in medicine, very large numbers are not involved. The interest and expectancy of the investigator might well be accompanied synchronistically by surprisingly favorable results to begin with, despite every precaution. This will be interpreted as miracles only by persons insufficiently acquainted with the statistical character of natural law. Okay, I'll stop there. You want to go on?
I will. Just one quick comment, because that last line, these will be interpreted as, in quotes, miracles only by persons insufficiently acquainted with the statistical character of natural law, puts me back to paragraph 912, where he says, what then happens is a kind of creatio ex nihilo. And that's creatio ex nihilo is just that, where matter is not eternal or not considered to be eternal, but had to be created by some divine created act. So in a sense, bringing things into being is interpreted as miracles, in a sense, giving birth to something that was not there prior. So that seems to be the overarching piece. So I'll go on with 915 if you don't have.
Well, I just add to that, no scientist has been able to explain what happened before the Big Bang, and it could have happened many times before. In other words, our universe is 13.8 billion years old, or whatever it is, although ironically it's something like 45 billion light years wide now, and that's a conundrum. But the point is that, okay, so what happened before that? What caused that Big Bang that produced billions and billions of galaxies, not billions of stars, but billions and billions of galaxies, and it happened only one time.
Well, and that brings to mind to me to scale up my spoon in the ocean argument, because 45 billion light years wide. Well, and then do we have adjacent 45 billion light year wide neighbors? I mean, so just because I fill my spoon with this 45 billion light year wide universe, and I see basically no other universes in this universe, there must not be any more universes. But that's faulty, because it's like when I say I stick the spoon in the ocean and I fill the spoon and I see no sharks in the spoon, so therefore there must be no sharks in the ocean. I mean, it's faulty. And so before the Big Bang and then outside the Big Bang, to me, are both geometrical adjacency questions that we aren't capable of answering if in fact we are in just one 45 billion light year wide drop of universe water. I mean, and then I think I always feel, well, so and at the same time it's interesting, and at the same time I say so, and so I'm both ambivalent and excited. It's kind of curious and it sparks the wonderment, but at the same time I'm kind of and what am I going to do with that once I find that out? Which becomes another statistic.
Yeah, because the problem is, if you see a galaxy far, far away in the James Webb telescope, even if you tried to travel there, it might be gone by the time you got there.
Well, yeah, and it reminds me of the old joke where just think about the importance of your shadow. The light from at night from that star has traveled for how many million light years to get just right to the ground, and you blocked it right at the last minute. So it's like,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, or you're the recipient of it, but then
exactly.
what? So what? Right.
Well,
Oh,
and then the other one is, oh, it traveled so long. That's your star of hope. Yeah, your hope, it's definitely dead. It's definitely been dead for years. So, I mean, there's so many ways to look at those things.
okay.
So 9:15.
All right. Yeah. Why don't you take us home with 9:15?
Okay. If, and it seems plausible, the meaningful coincidence or cross connection of events cannot be explained causally, then the connecting principle must lie in the equal significance of parallel events. In other words, their tertium comparationis is meaning. We are so accustomed to regard meaning as a psychic process or content that it never enters our heads to suppose that it could also exist outside the psyche. But we do know at least enough about the psyche not to attribute to it any magical power, and still less can we attribute any magical power to the conscious mind. If, therefore, we entertain the hypothesis that one and the same transcendental meaning might manifest itself simultaneously in the human psyche and in the arrangement of an external and independent event, we at once come into conflict with the conventional scientific and epistemological views. We have to remind ourselves over and over again of the merely statistical validity of natural laws and of the effect of the statistical method in eliminating all unusual occurrences, if we want to lend an ear to such an hypothesis. The great difficulty is that we have absolutely no scientific means of proving the existence of an objective meaning, which is not just a psychic product. We are, however, driven to some such assumption if we are not to regress to a magical causality and ascribe to the psyche a power that far exceeds its empirical range of action. In that case, we should have to suppose, if we don't want to let causality go, either that Swedenborg's unconscious staged the Stockholm fire, or conversely, that the objective event activated in some quite inconceivable manner the corresponding images in Swedenborg's brain. In either case, we come up against the unanswerable question of transmission discussed earlier. It is, of course, entirely a matter of subjective opinion which hypothesis is felt to make more sense. Nor does tradition help us much in choosing between magical causality and transcendental meaning, because on the one hand, the primitive mentality has always explained synchronicity as magical causality right down to our own day. And on the other hand, philosophy assumed a secret correspondence or meaningful connection between natural events until well into the 18th century. I prefer the latter hypothesis because it does not, like the first, conflict with the empirical concept of causality and can count as a principle, sui generis, that it obliges us not indeed to correct the principles of natural explanation as hitherto understood, but at least to add to their number an operation which only the most cogent reasons could justify. I believe, however, that the hints I have given in the foregoing constitute an argument that needs thorough consideration. Psychology, of all the sciences, cannot in the long run afford to overlook such experiences. These things are too important for an understanding of the unconscious, quite apart from their philosophical implications. Oh, you're still muted.
So I think that we can sum that up as, I'm a psychologist, psychiatrist, and these statisticians are statisticians, and sort of in the end, never the twain shall meet.
Never the twain shall meet.
Yeah, I mean, he goes on with this discussion of Professor Fierce's mathematical argument here at the bottom of the page. And so I will put it on the screen so that for those of you that are well versed in mathematics, if you want to go through this, you can. It's of actually no interest to me, so I am not going to be tempted to understand what they've said here. And I want next week to go on with part 3 here, which is the forerunners of the idea of synchronicity, which is indeed interesting, and goes on for another quite a number of pages here. So we still have.
Yeah, and I don't want to go through the math here because, first of all, he's using an orb of 8 degrees, which is a little bit way too generous. 5 to 6 to 7 is so. I mean, then that's me splitting hairs professionally, astrologically, but the 15-degree piece is important. But then I don't want to go into passive stellar architecture. I mean, so there's a whole lot in these numbers, but I think, again, putting them up on the screen, letting people go through them, because I think here it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I mean,
well, and it's definitely out of my wheelhouse now. I mean, back in 1979, when I had taken 15 courses in statistics by different names, I probably could have read this right off, but that was a long while ago for me. And the irony is, and here's the irony. So we'll go on with the forerunners of the idea of synchronicity later, okay? But the irony I want to talk about is that this statistical method of doing MBA programs, which has caused us to have a psychotic business environment, is that it's not useful. Okay, in other words, I immediately after graduating from that MBA program, I went into business instead of the law. And not once in my career, in my business career, aside from my law business career, so let's say from 79 on, we're talking about 43 years, not once have I had occasion to run a regression analysis or any statistical analysis, because in most businesses, and I was involved with a fairly large one, one that had subsidiaries in 16 countries, and it was global in scope. It was about a $200 million a year business when I was involved with it. Not once did I have even an inkling that I should do a statistical analysis on anything, because I never had a large enough population. And that is, what you're going to figure out the statistics on. I never had enough data to make any difference. And, and I was talking about things that we were producing 50 million meters a year of a certain product. And, but, that was way not enough data in order to tell me anything I needed in terms of operating a business. And so to the extent that we've created 2 generations now of MBA graduates who are only thinking about the numbers and not the people and not the employees and the shareholders involved. We have sorry, we've gone out on a limb that is not useful.
Well, yeah,
and we really need to come back to more study of behavioral science in MBA programs, among other things. But to have everything be based on statistics that you can never use is, okay, we did some interesting thinking and some interesting math, and I did learn the meaning of calculus in the business school, but I only learned 3 things in the business school, and none of them were in the classroom. So go ahead, Jordan.
I was going to say, back to your Big Bang example, and then paragraph 2 here. I mean, since an orbit of 8 degrees was taken as the basis of Professor Jung's calculation. Okay, so you have a point of origin. That's arbitrary. Professionally, astrologically, it's way too generous. But what I see is, if I take out the semantics of what I feel and what my experience tells me about what you need to do for an orb as a point of origin for comparison, then he comes further in that paragraph. So one of them with the 8-degree starting point must lie with an arc of 16 degrees, which, because of the couple, 8 degrees either side. So that's 16 degrees, except here's the thing, an arc of 15 degrees was taken for convenience. So we're arbitrary at the start with 8. 16 is what we should use, but it's inconvenient and a bunch of hassles. So let's make it 15, which is easier. So you're already skewing the results before you even begin. And so I laugh that so many people in statistics and business don't believe in divination, but I swear it factors into the margin in the business. And that's pretty much the, casting the weather report lots, as it were. And statistics becomes actually, to me, snake oil salesman divination. I mean, so
yeah.
You can turn it to where everything looks, how can we frame this so our numbers look good, so the shareholders think, so the psychology goes to short, buy, put, call, etc., in a way that benefits us. So in a sense, you're pushing the magnets around and then looking at them going, look, we're successful. No, you're good at manipulation. And
that's right. I would say to anybody, especially if you're a shareholder in any company, you can always find out where the flaws are in a company very easily by looking at the footnotes in their annual report. That's, I have proven this many times, much to the shock of my colleagues, because I've always been able to cut to the quick of where the flaws are in the argument that's in the main part of the annual report, whatever it is. And it always says, we're doing great and it's hunky-dory, right? But all you have to do is read the footnotes and immediately you get it. In 5 minutes, you can tear apart any company and know the truth.
Well, with the truth, and also understanding what's driving a particular statistic. I mean, someone filed Form 4 and there's been insider trading. Well, that was a whole big thing, as if it was illegal. It's not illegal. It means someone inside the company is trading their own stocks of the company. And the thing is, it's fine if it's anomalous and you're looking at it and you go, that's to be noted. But then if you do a little Google and you realize that person just sent their kid off to Yale.
Yeah.
Or they're buying a house, another one. They need cash.
Yep.
So basically they're ATMing the company. I mean,
Absolutely.
they're selling
Exactly.
38,000 square shares at total of 20 something $million or whatever. And well, if you look at what's behind why they did that, well, they might have needed the money,
Exactly. Yep.
and then that's not a statistic. That's I'm informed. I'm going to ignore that because guess what? There are people in that company and there are people running that company and they have needs like everybody else.
Right.
If I see the whole board do it, I'm like, now that might go.
That's right. Well, that's why it has to be disclosed, but and it is disclosed in the footnotes and usually, and you can understand the order of magnitude that you're considering. For example, Elon Musk sold I don't know, a certain number of shares of either not Lexus but Tesla or SpaceX in order to buy Twitter, and so he had to make that sale, but that didn't mean that SpaceX or Tesla are in financial trouble at the moment. It only meant that this was what he wanted to do with his money. And they're now saying that the guy's the world's richest man. Well, mark my words, that's that is a characterization that is a curse, because we see Bezos, who had a divorce after that happened. We see Bill Gates that had a divorce after that happened. I think even Jobs had a divorce after they were talking about how rich he was. So,
well, and his basically ATMing his other companies is him doing an equity distribution that's equitable to his investment particulars. I mean, he wants to, okay, we've got this going, I'm going to try to pull this off over here to support this. So in that sense, he's attempting that growth pays its own way. But the problem is, he might be pouring money down $44 million or 44 billion down a hole. I mean, who knows? So, and
nobody knows. I mean, obviously I do not think that Twitter is going to go out of business. I do not think that for a moment.
I think he's shaking free on purpose. And I guess the old investment adage is never underestimate the person who overestimates themselves, because you just don't know. And you don't need to follow
what can come. There are a lot of people involved one way or another, including the ones that are still inside Twitter, and they're highly incented to keep the thing going and be successful. And so I don't think for a moment that Twitter is going to go under, but I do think that along the way here, Elon Musk is going to have some very real up close and personal experiences with just how far the freedom of speech goes, and how that can affect your business and your life.
And I think the one thing too to factor, also another thing to factor, is what I call the dandelion principle. He just blew the dandelion seeds all over the place, all these people going out. So which ones are going to be creating Twitter's competition?
And other wonderful things, right?
So I mean, things. He might have just created a market of competition instead of being single market social media platforms where, there's what's the competition with Facebook, or what's the competition with Instagram? Well, you look at Reddit and all these others. Well, yeah, but then what happens? I mean, someone had a review of my deck on Reddit, and I've never even been on Reddit. So I go make a comment, thank them for the wonderful review, and blah, blah, blah. Immediately the next morning, I had 172 spams that were new, different, And I didn't notice the connection until about a month later. I went, why all this block and cancel and, Marcus fishing and all. I went, why am I spending so much time on this? When did this happen? And I go back in the calendar and I went, well, how did I not notice that I went on a platform I'd never been on? And now, poof, immediately, I'm like, oh, so I canceled it. Immediately the next day, I had 15. It started to dissipate. And now they're kind of hanging out. I've got 15 new. But so that's competition.
Yeah, sure.
That's the fact that Reddit has that kind of, baggage that comes with it is not positive. Now, if they change that, well, then they can up their pretty shiny, polished, reputation higher. And so I think, he may have just created his own competition with the, blowing the dandelions out.
So we still have another 50 pages in Synchronicity that go to the end of this volume. And
I like it. It's the forerunners of Synchronicity. So we're going to get that epistemological, the science, the philosophy of how we know.
That'll be useful.
Yeah.
So I wish everyone well. And we're going to talk about synchronicity some more in the coming weeks. And meanwhile, come over and join us. What is it that we're doing?
2 essays in analytical psychology.
Oh, right. Yeah, we're getting close to the end of 2 essays on analytical psychology also. And so we'll have to consider what we're going to do with that. And so I think that what I'm kind of interested in doing is doing an analysis, a commentary on the Red Book in this group, and then in the advanced group, ultimately, but probably not for another 6 months at least, and probably more like a year, because we have 2 other books ahead of it.
Right.
I think we should consider doing the black books because there's a reason why Sonushan Dasani spent 10 years working on the black books. You wouldn't think, based on the success of the Red Book, you wouldn't think that it was so necessary. But as I read the black books, and I've now completed all but one of them, they are substantially different from the Red Book. And what Shamdasani has done is he has highlighted every word that was changed between the black books and the Red Book. So these were decisions that Carl Jung made before he published the Red Book, and certain things that he deleted that were in the black books, but he didn't put them in the Red Book. And I have found that those are huge things that he changed, and it's probably not worth in a public forum like this going through those minutiae. But I think at some point I want to do that in the advanced group.
Yeah, and it reminds me, between Black Book and Red Book, something called ontogeny, ONTGYNY, which is putting together the collective of the sketches up until you finish the design, and oftentimes some just disappear. It's a process, and so I think in the Black Books there's that kind of, here is the path he traveled, but the finished piece, basically, AKA editing, made the architecture, so to speak, of the Red Book. And so
right, and he still didn't publish it in his lifetime.
No, he hid it. I mean, he stuck it in a drawer, and 50 years later, oh, what's this? And put it under glass and take the pictures, and the whole that movie that they did on the making of the Red Book. It's quite an interesting piece, but the thing is that he was so thorough to have 6 of those black books as the design process of 7 of the black books to put together the one red book. So he's very much not at the beck and call only of the unconscious and the conscious. He's playing it out and then making decisions, which is, I think that's a great exercise to look at the decisions he made to humanize the process of, what actually went into making this masterpiece piece of the red book.
Yeah, and that isn't to say that the black books aren't also a masterpiece.
Oh,
no, they are in tremendous ways. And so just at the end of this now, I want to remind everyone, this is the new book just published, the Schizophrenia Complex by Eve Moran. And we are going to do a Wisdom Path session with her on Saturday, January 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern time, U.S. Eastern time. That'll be 11 a.m. Pacific time and high noon Mountain time for the benefit of Jordan. And it will also be 8 p.m. European time. So
I have to put on my Spurs.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting. Actually, I want to do two. I want to do one that focuses on the genesis of her book, which was to talk about the schizophrenia of her son, which is now controlled, and how that affects everybody in the community. And then on a second occasion, I want to talk with her about the collective implications, which include this fairy tale of Three Billy Goats Rough, which we started this conversation with. So, so peace, everyone.